Well, joining me is Caitlin Huxley, and she wrote a great book about the intersection between Sun Tzu and political campaigns. And to be honest with you, it's a thing that I had been teaching for years that I wish I had source material for. So what I end up doing in my courses is just assigning different things of Sun Tzu or just assigning Sun Tzu, period. But I think what's better about this book, though, is that it really does apply to what you should take away from Sun Tzu as you're applying it to political campaigns. I think it's great. There are other books, for example, that use Sun Tzu, like The Winner Within, which is like written by Pat Riley, and it's about basketball. And I think that this is on that level where you're looking for things that apply to what you're doing for a living. So thank you so much, Caitlin. I really appreciate you doing this with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
It was a fun book to write more than anything. I started reading it really for myself. You know, everyone tells you when you get into anything strategic, anything business related, that you should read Sun Tzu.
Right.
I find that those people can rarely quote more than a line or two, but it's actually a very surprisingly short book. I think as an audiobook, it's like 2 hours long or something. The thing that really surprised me, secondly, was the practicality of the advice in there. What I expected was like outdated military tactics, the right way to tie a sandal and hold a spear and stuff like this. But it's really about, the psychological effects of war, the importance of knowing yourself and what you have going on. Same thing for knowing your opponent, and really touches on something that we don't see a lot of in modern campaigning, in campaigning at all, is the possibility of winning without fighting. Every year campaigns get a little more expensive, and a lot of the book touches on how to make it so you don't have to run a campaign and expend that kind of cash.
Yeah. What I love about the book is like you essentially take us through Sun Tzu's thinking and then you bring in your own stories. Give us just a little bit of your background, like how you came to campaigns and then how you came to Sun Tzu.
Yeah, so campaigns was an accident. I had been volunteering a little, and then I started taking on campaigns. And the way you learn campaigning is by messing it up a bunch. They just kind of throw you out there. You knock on doors, you screw up with some voters, you make some bad plans and test things out, and it really puts you in a position where you have a hard experience of what not to do. But I started out a little before '08 as a libertarian. If I wanted to win, I realized pretty quickly I had to join one of the major political parties, and the Republicans in Chicago were pretty moderate, reasonable folks. So I joined up with them, and the rest is kind of history. I've been managing races. I really liked it.
Yeah, one of the greatest things about campaigns is that you do get to start out at that level. Like nobody goes straight to the major leagues, and if you do, you invariably just end up screwing up. The people who really are good at this always start off as volunteers and then end up in a paid position, and then all of a sudden they catch the bug, and before you know it, you're running races. As you were going through your career, where did you get to Sun Tzu? And where did you come to it and say, okay, these principles I could actually use on real campaigns? And then how did you get to writing a book on that?
So late. Really looking back, I wish it was earlier. The beginning of my career, I've been working with Leadership Institute to have them come in and do trainings. And so I've been focused on the practical, tactical, how to manage a campaign, how to knock on a door, how to talk to the people, how to target voters, et cetera, et cetera. But it was not until I went on a road trip and I got bored of my music and just needed something to read. And so I started picking up books. I started with the shortest one, and it happened to be Art of War. It's so short, you can read it over and over again. And so I've read it a few times, and when I listen to it, when I read it, I stop, I reflect, I think, okay, how does that relate? And really, the book started just as a thought exercise for myself. I read through it. I wrote down what I thought. It started out as a blog when we were on a break from campaign season for a winter, and I've deleted that. But now, I thought it was pretty good. I thought other people could really benefit from it. I shared it around. It got good responses, and so I figured I'd turn it into a book, and I'm pretty happy with the results. Like you said, I take it through Sun Tzu, how he wrote it, chapter 1, 2, 3. If I were to redo it, I might reorganize the book a bit to be more, here's where it's applicable to people in this order. But I figured it was probably best to stick in the order he wrote it.
I mean, I don't think that was necessarily a bad call. I mean, because for people who are really familiar with Sun Tzu, they know how it proceeds, right? It's a very linear book. It's a very clear book, and it's short. When you look at like sort of strategic considerations, because people who think they know Sun Tzu always look at him as like a master of strategy. Talk about some of the strategic considerations that you feel come out of the book beyond know thy enemy, which is like the one quote that everyone will know from Sun Tzu, no matter what campaign level you're at.
So the one that I think is actually the most important for people to focus on is the general who makes many calculations in his temple before the battle is the one who's likely to win. The general who loses makes but few. And this is something you see time and time again. Candidates put the cart before the horse. When I consult for candidates, the first thing I ask is, do you have a campaign plan? And they always say yes. And I say, great, let's see it, expecting them to share with me a Google Doc or something. And they say, well, it's all up here. Well, that's not a plan. That's an idea. If you don't think about your race, there's, I think, a quote I use in the book. If you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. And it's exactly this. Strategy comes down to taking the time to consider what you'd like to do, consider the implications of that, what might go wrong with that, and then make contingency plans for what if those things do go wrong. And sorry to say the thing you asked me not to say, but number two there really is, if you know your enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 1,000 battles. But that's really just nowadays saying knowledge is power. And in fact, the rest of that quote, the part that doesn't get quoted, is if you only know yourself but not your enemy, you've only gone halfway to victory. The fact is, again, that these candidates, they decide what they're going to do, and they go and run without taking into account the strength of their opponent, the support that their opponent might have, the experience of their opponent, how well suited they are to the district. If you just focus on how you're going to get across that 50% line, but forget to consider that your opponent is trying to do the same thing, you're going to be caught flat-footed.
It's even more complicated now with modern campaigns, right? In big races, it's not just your opponent, but it's all of the groups that are going to be playing in the race. So it's not just, you versus me. It's also the groups that are aligned with me that can't coordinate with me, but we all know that they're going to hit you because that's what those kinds of groups do. And the same thing the other way, right? And so you can't just plan for your enemy. You also need to know your enemy's army, on the side, because they're going to go ahead and act in ways that you can't predict. I think it's become even less predictable now over the past, let's say, 25 years than it was, where you knew it was a 1v1, and now it's many versus many. And that's really, it makes actually strategy much more difficult, I think. What's your reaction to that?
They make things complicated. When you are looking at a race, you're building up a winning coalition of the people in your district. How do they vote, base versus opposition? And then you're looking at those swing voters and who makes them up and how you can reach them. And it always sort of was this way, where you needed to get access to the community leaders, the people that mean a lot to them, that can sway the opinions of the people in your district. But now those community leaders come with super PACs. Independent expenditures have made things really, I don't want to say hard, because it's not harder. It's not so different. It's just changed the importance of the key people in your district. It's changed who they were. They used to be the actual community activists, the leaders who had newsletters, etc. So still, a far reach on social media is important, as long as that reach is directed at your district. But with it comes a lot of money and a lot of mail, a lot of TV, a lot of Google and Facebook ads. And these things are in a category of their own, right? They're not hard to deal with because you can't really deal with them. Your side versus their side sways the public, especially if folks are lying about you, which they are. But I think it almost makes it more important to focus on the fundamentals of the things that you can affect, right? Obviously, it's important to win these PACs and to see what you can do to get their support and thus their money, or at least, as Sun Tzu would say, to negate your opponent's benefits here. If you can maneuver yourself in a way that those independent expenditures who would be behind him don't find you so bad, then they're less likely to spend that money against you, and you can negate some of that with strategy.
And by the way, I mean, knowing dynamic, when I was reading that piece, I mean, the first thing I thought of was like vetting and opposition research, research of the community, primary research, because I'm a research guy. So these are things that come to my mind. When you think about the art of war, I mean, how close are political campaigns, to what he sees as war? Because I think that that's where a lot of people sort of like fall away from Sun Tzu. They're like, well, that's about war and I'm not doing this, I'm in business. And that's where like a lot of people, including yourself, have said, no, wait a minute. This is actually a universal kind of way of looking at conflict or even competition. So how do you look at it in terms of, the art of war?
Yeah, historically, for a very long time, the word strategy meant war, right? If you were doing something strategic, it was war, especially in Sun Tzu's time. The most influential had the power to back it up. And power means something slightly different today. But the fact is, if you're doing strategy, if you have to come up with a plan, if you have to take into account how your opponent is going to affect that plan, if you're going to need to change that plan, if you put together some contingencies, then the advice he gives is applicable. Because like I said in the opener there, he doesn't tell you how to tie sandals or form troops or which side of the river to stand on. It's all about this. It's know yourself and your enemy. It's plan before battle. Rapidity is the essence of war. It's knowing there are a lot of tactics, right? Things that you can do to put together a strategy. There's a lot that goes into modern planning that is heavily informed by some of the stuff he talks about.
Let's talk about like those tactics, during modern campaigning. What do you think how you're applying Sun Tzu to tactical things like fundraising or like earned paid in social media research, and even like grassroots organizing and getting out the vote? Like, how do you see like the lessons that you learned from Sun Tzu in those kinds of tactics? Because when you're talking to a campaign audience, I mean, these are the people who are thinking, well, okay, I get Sun Tzu and the whole thing, but like, how does that relate to the things that I will actually do?
There's one I really like. He says something along the lines of, if you're going to be communicating on the battlefield, your words will only go so far. You need to institute a series of drums and signal flares and things like this. You need to find a way to communicate with people no matter how far they are. And
there you go.
That is something that modern campaigns need to do. He says you're going to need to put something into place. Long before you hire troops, you need to institute a Slack or some WhatsApp channels or whatever works for you and your team. But you need to find a way so that when you give an order, it can be rapidly disseminated, right? That you can give it to your generals, that they can give it to the people on the ground, and that they can use that to train their actual door knockers, their volunteers and interns in as rapid a manner as possible. There are places certainly where it falls short. One part of it is your men might lie down and cry knowing that the battle tomorrow might be the last day they live. And that's not the case, right?
To me, and I feel like that is like the end of the campaign where you have a sense of whether or not you're going to win or lose, right? I mean, there are some surprises and everyone's been through it, but in most campaigns you sit there and you're like, I'm going to be unemployed tomorrow morning. All right. So I could see that being applicable to to campaign life, which is like, at the end of the campaign, you just be like, I'm going to lay down and cry and hope it works.
Well, so I took it slightly different. He talks about in this section motivating your troops, how you have to put them into a place where there's no retreat, where it's win or death. And certainly, again, this isn't so applicable. Right. You should be thinking that your volunteers, your staffers aren't there just for the money and the accolades, but they're there because they believe in the cause, right? You are fighting for your ideas and your opponent believes the opposite, especially in our two-party system. There's a lot of direct opposition. If you are a pro-choice candidate and you're fighting against a pro-life candidate and you guys lose, that is, one vote out of probably many, but failures cascade. Your ideals are at stake. The things that you believe in are seriously in danger of being destroyed. And your people will feel very similar to dying, obviously not so similar. But there are some important issues here, and they need to feel the gravity of the situation.
Exactly. So what's the one thing you think people really don't get about Sun Tzu?
Honestly, the reason that this book is so timeless is that the advice is fairly general, right? If you look at the successful races in contentious districts, you'll find a lot of parallels between what is said in the book and what is actually done. A lot of that we teach because we've discovered it, but you shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel. Sun Tzu is about planning, about writing a plan out on paper and then going over it again. And then going over it again, and then going over it again. And I think that's as many times as I can say that, but it really keeps going. It's a very useful metaphor for planning and the importance of doing so.
I think that's an underrated thing in campaigns, because not only do you need to have the plan, but you also need to iterate on the plan as you go along. So as you're getting feedback from the marketplace during the campaign, from voters, I know that there are definitely campaigns that lost because they did not go back to the plan and say, okay, is this still real? Do we need to pivot? Do we need to make another plan? Do we need to respond to what's going on in the field? And instead of just being like, well, that's our plan and we're going with it. So that's a really interesting point that Sun Tzu says, that, you need to keep going back to that plan and not just be so rigid to the plan that you have to, react to what's going on in the field. And I think that that's a thing that some campaigns just whiff completely on. For example, Hillary Clinton's campaign whiffed on that completely because their team had a plan. They were going to stick to it no matter what. And I had a former student of mine in Ohio who was knocking on doors where they were sending him, and he's like, those people don't want to vote for Hillary. And he would give all the information back, with all of his teams, and they'd be like, nope, doesn't matter. We got our plan. Well, if you don't listen and you don't iterate on the plan as you go through the campaign, you're breaking something that Sun Tzu said, right? Which is, you need to be open to changes in that plan as you're going along.
Yeah, another bit that I think makes it special was that he focuses on the possibility of achieving victory without fighting, right? Through diplomacy, intelligence, maneuvering, right? He says, let your great object be victory and not lengthy campaigns. The one thing that I think everyone really misses when we're teaching campaigns is how not to fight them. Every year, campaigns get more and more expensive. And if you have to go build a huge team and go door to door and hire staffers who are more expensive every year, if you have to spend on mail and TV and ads, you are missing an opportunity to take 2 years off. If you can't win without a great expenditure, you're courting the possibility of a Pyrrhic victory where you end up spending all your campaign cash. I think before this, we were talking a little bit about the perpetual campaign, the permanent campaign.
Right.
How as soon as you're done with election day, you need to plan for the next election day. And, you can't do that if you're out of money. If you can spend a few years courting the people in your district who make those decisions, who influence those independent expenditure packs. If you can get the support behind you so that opposition to you is futile, then you can run without having to bear the cost, maintaining all those resources to continue staving off, would-be challengers. And I think nobody focuses on that aspect.
Yeah, and I think that that's the big difference between the way campaigns used to be run. They're far more competitive districts. Whereas now, if you could somehow, some way keep opposition out of your primary, you've won. And so to a real extent, like that's what's going on, particularly in the Republican Party, where they are responding to what they believe is what their voters want, or at least their primary voters want, because they know that once they get into the general election, they're going to win. So to a real extent, they're taking that very much to heart. If I could win it in the primary without a fight and keep people out and have the right support from either Trump or a lot of money or the local leadership or all of the above, then you don't have to run. And you've won the race without even, running a campaign. And that goes exactly to where you're talking about. There's some really good storytelling in the book, and it really helps sort of like brings together, like the relevance of Sun Tzu. What's your favorite story in the book and why?
So the most relevant story, I had a candidate who they're going to lie about you, right? I think that's something we don't tell people. The last section of the book is about, using fire as a weapon, which is, using scandal, using inflammatory attacks against your opponent. So one day I come into the campaign office, and one of my candidates is in tears, right? They somebody sent out a mailer from an organization that was named the conservative representatives of, you dig through it, and of course it's the exact opposite of this, but you can name your pack whatever you want. And so they sent out talking about how she was, honestly, I don't even remember the lie at this point, but it was ridiculous. Her immediate reaction was, I need to set the story straight. I need to make sure that our base knows that this isn't real. This is something you see all the time. You really had to put on the reins here. You had to stop things and say, okay, one, who saw this? When you get mail, and you get a lot of mail, how much do you read it? What percentage of these people do you think actually read this mail piece and believe it? Okay, and so maybe it's worth addressing it to those people who come up with we should come up with something to say when people say this to us, right? When they ask us about this particular lie, you need to be prepared. But, if you're familiar with the Streisand effect, right? That is, the more you talk about it, the more you make it into a thing. By repeating this lie, you're going to perpetuate it. And this is my favorite because it happens all the time. It is one of the most common ways I see candidates get sidetracked. They, instead of spending time doing the things that we had written down in the plan that we were going to do, like, going to town halls and giving this speech, she wanted to give another one that talked all about the things that her opponents wanted her to be talking about. That always kills me.
Yeah, because I mean that is like the exact opposite of how most campaigners and most candidates think at this point. It's like, okay, if I'm hit, I got to hit back, and then we move on. And so your counsel is not every hit needs a response because it takes you off your game.
Yeah, you should gauge the actual impact. Obviously, if it's something that's everywhere, if you start hearing it every time you go to a door, then perhaps it's something that you need to address in a wider case. But you'll know that when it happens. Mm-hmm. Just, one of my favorite tactics when I was young was taking a yard sign every night, and I would put it in our opponent's front yard just because it pissed them off, and that made me happy. Well, that's what they're doing to you, right? They made sure you got this mailer because your friends and your family and your voters and you are on this mailing list. They didn't scrub you off it because they want you to see it. It's bait. It
is bait. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this. I mean, I really appreciate it. I encourage people to actually read the book. It's called Ancient Wisdom for Modern Campaigns. And it is, it's outstanding. Yep. I think they should read it, like you said, at the front end of a campaign, not in the middle, because, the best value that you're going to get from it is strategic instead of tactical. So thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. It was cool. It's always fun to talk about. Like I said, it was fun to write. It's a trip, It's a book Definitely. I thought was one thing and turned out to be another. And really, I wrote for myself, and it just it was fun.